I sat in Logan Airport's departure lounge, scrolling through my phone while waiting for Julian's flight from Zurich. My friend Sarah had just texted me a photo from a charity gala in Geneva. I opened it casually, expecting another boring event picture. Instead, my world tilted sideways. Julian stood there in his tailored suit, arm draped around a blonde woman, 2 children pressed against his sides. The caption read, "Dr. Ashford and family." My coffee turned cold in my hand. The comments below called her Mrs. Ashford. I read that line 3 times, each word carving itself deeper into my chest. The boarding announcement echoed around me, but I couldn't move. I just stared at those children, at the way Julian's hand rested on the boy's shoulder with such natural ease. I walked to the bathroom on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. The mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, still wearing the necklace with Julian's initials. My reflection looked back at me with something new in her eyes, something cold and calculating. I whispered to myself, if he can perform miracles abroad, he's about to meet one here. I deleted the photo from Sarah's message, then forwarded it to a new email address I created on the spot. Evidence 1. Julian landed that evening with his perfect smile and a bouquet of Swiss roses. He kissed me at the arrivals gate like we were in a romantic movie. I let him, studying every micro-expression on his face. Over dinner at our favorite restaurant, he described his exhausting weeks at the clinic, the difficult surgeries, the language barriers. I nodded and smiled, filing away each lie like evidence in a case I was already building. His cuffs smelled faintly of perfume, something floral and expensive. Not mine. He handed me a velvet box across the table. Inside was a bracelet engraved for my only love. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I thanked him and let him clasp it around my wrist, all while calculating how many other gifts he'd bought with our joint account. That night, after he fell asleep, I used the fingerprint he'd left on his laptop's power button. His inbox opened like a confession. Flight confirmations to cities he'd never mentioned. Wire transfers to accounts I'd never seen. Photos in a folder labeled The Andersons, Winter Chalet. My hands stayed perfectly steady as I copied everything to a hidden drive. Then an email auto-loaded in his drafts folder. See you next month, darling. The kids keep asking when you'll be back. Morning sunlight cut harsh lines through our bedroom blinds. I made coffee while Julian showered, scrolling through his documents like a detective examining crime scene photos. The woman's name appeared repeatedly. Alara Anderson. She owned a medical clinic co-funded by Julian's foundation. Their children were named Lena and Kaylin Anderson Ashford. He'd hyphenated their names. That detail felt like a slap. I copied every file onto a flash drive I'd bought specifically for this purpose, labeling it Phase 1 in neat handwriting. When Julian entered the kitchen, hair still damp, I asked casually, "How's Zurich this time of year?" He froze for half a second, eyes flickering with something that might have been panic. Then his smile returned, smooth as ever. "Cold as always," he said, pouring himself coffee. He didn't notice his laptop's reflection in the window behind him, where an email from Alara still glowed on the screen. The subject line read, "Love you, E." I sipped my coffee and watched him lie to me about conference schedules and patient consultations. Each word became another brick in the wall I was building around him. 2 weeks passed in careful silence. I scheduled a meeting with Niles Garner, our financial advisor for the past decade. His office smelled like leather and old money. He greeted me with his usual small talk about market trends until I slid the flash drive across his mahogany desk. "I need a full audit," I said quietly. "Everything Julian's touched in the last 5 years. And Niles, this needs to stay between us." He inserted the drive into his computer, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he scrolled. "Cambria," he said slowly. "He's funding 2 complete households. The money's hidden under medical grants and charity disbursements." I'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach turn. "I want every transaction traced back to him," I said. "Every dollar, every transfer, every lie documented." Niles studied me with new respect. "Are you leaving him?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He's still collecting the rope he'll hang himself with. As I walked out of his office into the afternoon sunlight, my phone buzzed. Niles had texted one line. "You'll want to see the Cayman account." I stood on the sidewalk, business people rushing past me, and smiled. Julian left town again 3 weeks later for another conference, this one supposedly in Brussels. That same evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find the woman from the photo standing on my porch. Alara looked exhausted, eyes red and swollen. She clutched a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. "You're his wife," she said, her accent making the words sound almost musical despite their weight. "I didn't know until 2 days ago." I stepped aside to let her in, my mind racing through possibilities and strategies. Inside the envelope were birth certificates for both children, letters Julian had written to Alara, photos spanning years. Evidence of a parallel life I'd known nothing about. "He told me you died 5 years ago," Alara whispered, sinking onto my couch. "Complications from an illness." He showed me obituary clippings. I poured her tea with steady hands, my anger crystallizing into something sharper and more useful. "Sit down, Alara," I said. "We're going to fix this, but we're going to do it properly." The nanny cam I'd installed in the kitchen last week activated silently. Evidence too. Alara's voice shook as she told me everything. The trips Julian made every month, always with plausible medical excuses. The money he sent regularly explained as consulting fees. The promises he'd made about leaving me once the timing was right. She believed every word. "He said you died of cancer," she repeated, tears streaming down her face. "He wore a black armband at the clinic for weeks. Everyone there knows me as his widow remarried." I didn't interrupt, just let her words fill the recorder I'd activated on my phone. Every confession, every detail about Julian's deception became another piece of the puzzle. When she finished, she looked at me with desperate hope. "What are you going to do?" I poured more tea, the kettle whistling like an alarm. "Not what, Alara. When." We sat in heavy silence as evening shadows stretched across my living room. Then I slid her a folder, the same one labeled Phase 1 from Niles's office. "You want to expose him?" she asked. "No," I replied calmly. "We'll let him expose himself." Outside, headlights swept across my windows. Julian's car pulled into the driveway. He was home 3 days early. Julian walked through the door, wearing his politician smile, the one that used to make me feel safe. He froze mid-step when he saw Alara on the couch. The flowers he'd been holding dropped to the floor. "Cambria, what is this?" His voice cracked on my name. I stood slowly, letting the moment stretch like a wire about to snap. "A reunion, apparently. I thought I should meet your other wife." Alara started crying again, pressing tissues against her face. Julian's eyes darted between us, calculating damage, searching for exits. "Please," he begged, taking a step forward. "It's not what you think. Let me explain." I lifted my phone and pressed record, holding it steady. "It never is what we think, is it?" His panic was visible now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. I pressed stop on the recording, not because I was finished, but because I'd captured exactly what I needed, his raw fear. Alara left moments later, stumbling down the porch steps. Julian followed her outside, whispering urgently. I watched them argue in the driveway through the window. Then I smiled when Alara slipped something small into my mailbox before driving away. At midnight, I retrieved what Alara had left, another flash drive. This one was encrypted, but I'd built algorithms for a living before marrying Julian. Breaking his simple password took less than an hour. The files made my hand shake for the first time. Photos of Julian and Alara, timestamps proving he'd been with her during trips he'd claimed were humanitarian missions. Offshore bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. Then I found the video. Julian and Alara arguing in her kitchen. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks. "You'll ruin everything," he shouted into her face. She'd been recording on her security camera. He never noticed. The timestamp showed 2 months ago, during his supposed mission to Honduras. I sat back in my office chair, the blue light from my screen making everything look cold and clinical. This wasn't just adultery anymore. This was assault, fraud, possibly worse. I opened a new document on my computer and typed carefully, Phase 2, legal containment. Then I started writing down every detail, every piece of evidence, every witness who might testify. By sunrise, I had a roadmap to his destruction. I didn't go to the police immediately. Instead, I called Ava Lorraine, my college roommate who'd become a federal attorney. We met at a quiet cafe far from anywhere Julian might visit. Cambria, this is career suicide if it leaks wrong, Ava warned after I'd explained everything. Media will crucify you both. I slid the flash drives across the table. Then it won't leak wrong. I want the law to bury him cleanly, professionally, and permanently. Ava spent an hour reviewing the evidence on her encrypted laptop, her expression darkening with each file. He's laundering charity funds, she finally said. International wire fraud, identity theft, possible embezzlement. Cambria, he's completely finished. I sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. Not finished, I corrected softly. Prepared. We discussed strategy for another 2 hours. Ava took notes in her precise handwriting, building the framework for a case that would be airtight. Finally, she looked up with concern. We'll need one final piece. The foreign clinic's books. Original documents, not copies. That's when I realized what I had to do. Then I'm going to Geneva, I said. Ava nodded slowly. Be careful. If he suspects anything, he'll run. 3 weeks later, I boarded a plane at Logan Airport, the same terminal where I'd waited for Julian months ago, back when I'd still believed in his goodness. Now, I was hunting him. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I scrolled through photos on my phone. Julian at charity events, Julian receiving awards, Julian saving lives. Every image a carefully constructed mask. I whispered to the window reflection. You built your empire on lies. Let's see how it looks when the foundation crumbles. Geneva was cold and beautiful, mountains cutting sharp lines against gray skies. Alara met me at a cafe near the clinic. She looked stronger now, more focused. Thank you for coming, she said. The staff thinks you're here for a charitable audit. They won't question Dr. Ashford's wife. We walked into the clinic together, me wearing my most professional suit and my wedding ring. The staff greeted us warmly, offering coffee and small talk about Julian's brilliant work. Alara nodded to the head accountant, who led us to a private office. From a locked drawer, he pulled a sealed folder marked confidential. Inside were financial statements spanning 5 years, each one signed in Julian's distinctive handwriting. As I flipped through the clinic's documents, one transaction made my blood freeze. A check for $500,000, wired to something called the Lowell Foundation. Lowell was my maiden name. Julian had created an entire fake charity using my identity, funneling money through it to hide his tracks. I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. The accountant explained nervously that Dr. Ashford had established the foundation years ago for orphan medical care. Except I'd never heard of it, never signed anything, never authorized a single transfer. Back at my hotel that evening, I stood before the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back looked nothing like the quiet wife who used to iron Julian's shirts before his lectures. This woman had sharp edges, cold calculation behind her eyes. Something surgical in her patience. I thought about Julian's voice, how he used to whisper, "You make me better, Cambria." Now I understood. I made him useful. I gave him legitimacy, a respectable American wife, while he built his secret empire. You forged the wrong woman, I said to my reflection. I texted Ava. It's time to build the case. I returned home before Julian did, stepping back into our house like an actress returning to a stage. Everything smelled the same, his cologne mixed with our memories, the illusion of domestic peace. When he walked through the door 4 days later, his smile was polished and bright. You look different, he observed, kissing my cheek. Do I? I replied. I feel the same. He didn't notice the recorder I'd hidden under the vase on our dining table. Every conversation from now on would become evidence, every lie documented. He sat across from me at dinner, talking enthusiastically about the foundation's growth, about saving children in war zones, about expanding to South America. I watched him perform morality like it was a script he'd memorized perfectly. "We should renew our vows," he suggested suddenly, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "It would be good for appearances. The board loves that family man image." I smiled back sweetly. "Of course, Julian. Let's make it memorable." That night, I emailed Ava. "He wants a vow renewal. That's where he'll fall." She responded within minutes. "Perfect. Public, recorded, witnesses everywhere. Start planning." For years. That's how long I waited, building my case brick by careful brick. For years of dinner parties where I smiled beside him. For years of charity events where I played the devoted wife. For years of collecting evidence while pretending I'd forgiven everything. Julian thought my silence meant surrender. He had no idea I was constructing his prison from the inside. By year 2, I'd traced every dollar he'd stolen. By year 3, journalists started asking quiet questions about foundation irregularities. By year 4, his colleagues stopped meeting his eyes at conferences. I'd created an anonymous watchdog group called the Lowell Foundation Watch, leaking carefully selected information to media outlets. Nothing traceable to me. Everything devastatingly accurate. Julian once told me, "Reputation is everything in medicine." I took that lesson to heart and decided his reputation would be the weapon that destroyed him. One morning in the 4th year, I woke to a news alert on my phone. Renowned surgeon Dr. Julian Ashford faces audit amid funding concerns. The beginning of his end had finally gone public. I made coffee and watched the sunrise, feeling something like peace. Julian stormed into my office that evening, his mask cracking for the first time in years. "Did you know about this?" he demanded, waving his phone at me. "About the audit?" I looked up from my laptop calmly. "Only what the news says." "Why?" His jaw clenched, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. I'd seen this expression before in courtroom footage, the moment criminals realize the ground beneath them isn't solid. "Someone's leaking information," he said. "Confidential Foundation records. Someone with access." I shrugged and returned to my screen. "Maybe you should have been more careful." He slammed his hand on my desk hard enough to make my coffee cup jump. "You think you can destroy me?" I stood slowly, meeting his gaze with a coldness I'd been perfecting for 4 years. "No, Julian. You did that yourself." He left that night, slamming doors throughout the house. I knew exactly where he'd go. Straight to Alara, desperate to control the narrative, to fix what couldn't be fixed. An hour later, my phone rang. Alara's voice trembled on the other end. "He's here," she whispered. "He knows we've been talking. Cambria, I'm scared." 2 days later, Julian appeared on television in a hastily arranged press conference. He wore his hero face, the one that had fooled everyone for so long. His voice carried false sincerity as he talked about misunderstandings and documentation errors. I watched from home with my morning coffee, a small smile playing at my lips. Behind him hung his foundation's banner, the logo gleaming like a broken halo. A reporter interrupted his prepared statement. "Dr. Ashford, can you explain the forged signatures in the Lowell Foundation accounts?" Julian's face froze mid-sentence. That was my cue. The documents had just been leaked to every major news outlet, complete with handwriting analysis proving the signatures were his, not mine. Documents I'd spent 4 years collecting, verifying, and organizing. The feed suddenly cut to static. I laughed out loud for the first time in years. Not from joy, but from the pure relief of watching justice finally begin. My phone exploded with messages. Friends asking if I was okay. Reporters requesting interviews. Ava sent a simple text. Showtime. I finished my coffee and started getting ready. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. The courthouse smelled like old wood and industrial cleaner, a mixture of history and barely contained chaos. Julian stood near the front with his legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits flanking him like bodyguards. His face was composed for the cameras outside, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He didn't look at me. Couldn't. But I looked at him long enough for him to feel the weight of 4 years of silence finally breaking. "Mrs. Ashford," the judge said, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You may take the stand." Every click of my heels on the wooden floor felt like a countdown. For years, Julian had commanded every spotlight, every stage, every room. Now he was trapped under the harsh fluorescent lights of accountability. I sat in the witness chair, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the jury. "Everything you're about to hear is true," I said clearly. "And I have proof of every single word." Julian's lead lawyer leaned over to whisper something urgent in his ear. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine fear flicker behind his carefully maintained composure. The courtroom went silent as I opened the first exhibit folder. Inside was a photograph I'd printed on high-quality paper. Julian stood on a beach in Tuscany, arm around a dark-haired woman, a little girl playing in the sand at their feet. "That," I said quietly, "is Dr. Ashford with his first family. His wife, Isadora. His daughter, Lucia." Gasps rippled through the spectators, like wind disturbing still water. Several jurors leaned forward. Julian's jaw tightened visibly, but he didn't speak. He just stared at me like a man watching his carefully constructed life burn to ash. While he was pledging fidelity to me in Ohio, I continued, keeping my voice steady. He was sending tuition payments to Italy, using money from my foundation, the one he created in my name without my knowledge, to support a family I never knew existed. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Julian's lawyer stood to object, but the judge waved him down. "Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Ashford." I turned another photo, face up. Julian holding baby Lucia, both of them laughing. "She calls him Papa," I said softly. The jury's silence was deafening. Julian's mother, sitting in the gallery, covered her mouth with her hand. "They say revenge tastes sweet, but that's a lie. It tastes metallic, like adrenaline mixed with old wounds that never properly healed." I'd rehearsed my testimony countless times, refining each word until it cut cleanly. Dr. Ashford taught me that loyalty is measured by silence, I told the jury. I stayed silent for 4 years, not because I forgave him, but because I needed the truth to be complete. I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Every sentence felt like wielding a surgical blade. The jury watched me intently now, their focus shifting from Julian to my words. When his lawyer stood for a cross-examination, he tried to twist my motives. "Mrs. Ashford, isn't this really about revenge? About a woman scorned?" I smiled slightly, the question exactly what I'd expected. "No," I said. "It's about correction. About making sure the truth is visible to everyone he fooled." The judge's gavel struck like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. When I stepped down from the stand, Julian's mother refused to meet my eyes. But his brother, sitting 2 rows back, caught my attention. He mouthed 2 words: "He's finished." By day 3 of the trial, the courthouse was packed beyond capacity. News vans lined the entire street outside. Headlines called me the woman who waited, which felt oddly appropriate. Julian arrived late that morning, looking pale and hollow-eyed. His expensive suit hung differently on him, as if he'd lost weight from stress. He tried to smile for the cameras, but the flash caught the truth underneath, a man unraveling. When the prosecution presented Exhibit 27, the courtroom buzzed with new energy. Bank transfers labeled Foundation Outreach filled the screen, each one leading to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Each account registered under Julian's control. "I traced these personally," I testified. "Every single transaction over 5 years." The prosecutor turned to Julian. "Dr. Ashford, can you explain why your wife's signature appears on documents she never saw?" Julian stammered, reaching for excuses that no longer existed in his arsenal. His voice actually cracked when he said the word trust. The judge called for a brief recess. Julian's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear. And Julian's eyes, for the first time in his entire privileged life, begged silently. Not for mercy, for my silence. But I'd given him enough of that already. When court reconvened, I noticed something different. More cameras than before, positioned at every angle. Julian's entire career had become content, his fall transformed into public spectacle. But my silence throughout the trial had been strategic, speaking only when necessary, letting the evidence carry the weight. As Julian testified in his own defense, his voice fragmented into pieces of the man he used to be. He tried playing victim, a misunderstood philanthropist betrayed by love gone wrong. "She's destroying me because she can't move on," he told the jury, gesturing toward me. I remained perfectly still, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. Then the prosecutor played the final recording. Julian's voice on a phone call 6 months ago, captured by Alara's security system. "She'll never leave," he said, laughing. "She's too afraid to start over. Too dependent." The courtroom gasped collectively. Julian went white as paper. I didn't need to say anything. The silence said everything that mattered. The judge called adjournment for the day. Outside, microphones swarmed as I descended the marble stairs. I stopped on the bottom step and looked directly into the cameras. "This isn't revenge," I said clearly. "This is revelation." Julian's legal team requested a private meeting before the verdict. His lawyer claimed it was about resolution, but I understood the real purpose. Julian wanted to beg. We met in a small conference room behind the courthouse. He looked diminished somehow, as if his arrogance had evaporated with his wealth and reputation. "Cambria," he began, voice shaking. "We don't have to continue this. I'll sign over everything. The house, the accounts, the foundation. Just end it quietly." I stared at the man who once made me believe love meant safety. Now he was offering money like it could purchase dignity back. "I'm not here for your money, Julian," I said coldly. "I'm here for your truth." He clenched his fists on the table, knuckles white. "You think you're righteous? You're destroying our entire family." The word family coming from his mouth was almost funny. "No, y whispered. You already did that." When I stood to leave, he shouted after me, desperation making his voice crack. "You'll regret this." I didn't look back. "I already did," I said. 4 years ago, when I decided to stay and build this case instead of leaving immediately. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation when we gathered for the verdict. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Julian sat rigid, a statue beginning to crack under pressure. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "On the charges of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." Gasps erupted. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Then heavy silence settled. Julian's head dropped into his hands, the sound of pride collapsing audibly. I didn't celebrate or smile. Revenge wasn't sweet like people claimed. It was quiet, heavy, and utterly final. The prosecutor nodded at me across the courtroom, a silent acknowledgement of victory. But I knew better. Justice wasn't complete until I walked out of that building with my head high and my dignity intact. "Dr. Julian Ashford," the judge continued, "you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with restitution to be determined." The rest blurred into background noise. I'd already heard what I came for. As I walked past Julian's table, he lifted his head, eyes red and desperate. "Cambria, was any of it real?" I paused, considering his question. "That's the tragedy, Julian. All of it was." Then I kept walking. Media outlets begged me to speak publicly. Television stations, journalists, podcast hosts. Everyone wanted the woman who brought down the perfect man. I agreed to exactly one interview on my terms in a studio of my choosing. The lights were bright and clinical. The host leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "If you could say one thing to your husband right now, what would it be?" I took a measured breath. "Thank you," I said simply. She blinked, clearly confused. "Thank you." "Yes." Because he taught me what silence costs and how to weaponize truth. He taught me that patience is more powerful than anger. That documentation defeats denial every single time. There was no vengeance in my voice, only hard-earned peace. Because revenge fades quickly, burning hot and dying fast. But wisdom echoes through everything that comes after. The interview aired that evening. The world didn't just see a woman who won a court case. They saw a woman who endured, who waited, who built justice from patience. Within days, my inbox filled with messages from survivors, people who'd been silenced by powerful spouses, asking how I'd found the strength. I answered every single one. Months after the trial ended, a letter arrived from Italy. The handwriting was delicate and unfamiliar, the postage stamp showing the Colosseum. Inside was a note on cream-colored paper. My name is Lucia. I'm your husband's daughter. I watched the entire trial online. Thank you for freeing my mother from his lies. She'd included a small photograph, a girl around 16 with dark hair and Julian's eyes, but softer somehow, kinder. A second letter fell from the envelope, this one from Isadora. He lied to both of us for over a decade. You gave truth back to all of us. I wish you peace and strength. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, letters trembling in my hands. For the first time since discovering that photograph at the airport, I cried. Not from loss or pain, but from the profound relief of closure finally arriving. These women, scattered across continents, had all been trapped in Julian's web of deception. Now we were free. That evening, I burned the last of the legal papers in my fireplace. The flames turned years of evidence into ash. As smoke rose toward the ceiling, I whispered to the empty room, "It's over, Julian." A year later, I moved to my parents' old farmhouse in Vermont. No cameras, no headlines, no reporters asking endless questions. Just quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, soil under my fingernails from the garden I'd planted. I started the Lowell Trust, a foundation providing legal aid to women silenced by powerful spouses. Every day brought letters from people learning to stand again after being broken. Sometimes I'd sit outside at sunset, tea cooling in my hands, thinking about the version of myself who once begged for Julian's love. She didn't know she'd transform into someone completely different, someone unbreakable. Neighbors asked occasionally if I ever thought about him. I told them the honest truth. Sometimes, but only as a lesson, not a wound. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about destroying Julian. It was about reclaiming myself, piece by careful piece. It was about learning that patience could be weaponized, that silence could be strategic, and that truth always surfaces eventually. The garden grew. The foundation helped hundreds of women, and I finally slept through entire nights. Justice, I learned, doesn't roar. It whispers. And sometimes the quietest victories echo the longest. He built his empire on deceit. I built my peace on the ruins. Kindly subscribe to the channel and click on the box on the screen to listen to the next story. Thanks for watching.